In the crucible of the Cold War space race, after Sputnik in 1957 and Yuri Gagarin's orbital flight on April 12, 1961, President John F. Kennedy set a bold national goal. On May 25, 1961, he challenged Congress to land a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth before the decade was out. He reinforced that charge with the stirring Rice University speech on September 12, 1962. NASA answered with the Apollo program, a massive national effort that brought together Marshall Space Flight Center designers, led by Wernher von Braun, contractors across the country, and the Manned Spacecraft Center in Houston for mission control. The program produced the Saturn V, a towering heavy-lift rocket launched from Kennedy Space Center Launch Complex 39A. Its first full test flights in 1967 and 1968 proved the vehicle could carry the command module Columbia and the lunar module Eagle toward translunar injection. Apollo 11, crewed by Commander Neil A. Armstrong, lunar module pilot Edwin Buzz Aldrin, and command module pilot Michael Collins, had clear public objectives. Liftoff on July 16, 1969 at 9:32 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time from Kennedy Space Center. Execute translunar injection and enter lunar orbit. Land the Eagle at Mare Tranquillitatis on July 20, 1969. Perform an extravehicular activity on the surface. Collect and return at least tens of kilograms of lunar samples, and bring all 3 astronauts safely home. Political pressure from the White House and Congress, massive funding, roughly $25 billion in period money, and exhaustive planning compressed risky innovation into a tightly choreographed campaign. Simulations, contingency plans, strict flight rules, and rehearsal flights reduced unknowns. Grumman built the lunar module, North American Rockwell built the command module, and thousands of contractors synchronized testing schedules. The stage was set. The crew sealed themselves in the gleaming spacecraft, and the nation watched as technology and geopolitics converged toward a single precarious descent. On July 16, 1969, at 9:32 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, the Saturn V rose from Kennedy Space Center Launch Complex 39A in a brazen plume of fire and thunder that announced a national wager on the lunar prize. Spectators on nearby beaches and millions watching on television felt the raw, titanic power as the SIC first stage burned for 2.5 minutes to clear the pad. As the rocket shed its stages, the S2 second stage and the S4B third stage executed precise burns that placed the stack into a 1-hour, 12-minute parking orbit around Earth, each separation timed and confirmed by mission control in Houston and by telemetry from Columbia. Inside the command module Columbia, Commander Neil A. Armstrong, lunar module pilot Edwin Buzz Aldrin, and command module pilot Michael Collins worked through a ritual of checks, reading circuit breakers aloud, comparing gauges, confirming fuel quantities, and running through abort procedures they had practiced in hundreds of simulations at the Manned Spacecraft Center. The crew ate measured meals, took rest periods, and kept a disciplined cadence of checklist calls that turned fearsome machinery into predictable routine. About 2 hours after liftoff, while the world watched live broadcasts and print headlines spread around the globe, engineers prepared for the transposition and docking that would extract Eagle from the S4B. Columbia separated and performed the elegant rotational transposition. Collins guided the command module to dock with the exposed lunar module. The capture latches closed, and the crew reported hard dock to Houston, a small but crucial triumph of human hands and valves. Ground teams monitored gyros, fuel cells, and environmental systems with hawk-eyed scrutiny. Any discrepancy in guidance, docking seals, or telemetry could cascade into catastrophe. With Eagle attached, the combined spacecraft separated from the S4B, and the third stage reignited for translunar injection, giving Columbia and Eagle the velocity to begin their ballistic arc toward the moon. Throughout the translunar coast, the astronauts ran system checks, took star sightings for navigation, stowed film magazines, and rehearsed contingencies for abort to Earth or abort to lunar orbit options, all while telemetry streamed to tracking stations at Goldstone, Honeysuckle Creek, and Australian facilities that stitched a global net of support. Subscribe. It won't fly the Eagle, but it helps morale. Public attention intensified. Networks dissected each update, and the White House and Congress received regular briefings. Everyone understood the margins were narrow. A misaligned burn, a failed valve, or a misread instrument could leave the men stranded. The crew's disciplined routines and the Saturn V's monumental performance braided into a single forward motion, tightening everyone's focus toward lunar orbit insertion and the perilous descent that lay ahead. On July 19, 1969, Apollo 11 inserted into lunar orbit and settled into reconnaissance passes over Mare Tranquillitatis. The crew, Neil A. Armstrong, Edwin Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins, spent hours rehearsing the powered descent checklist, inspecting the descent engine and the rendezvous radar, which would later cause trouble. On July 20th, as Eagle separated from Columbia and began its powered descent, TRW's throttleable descent propulsion system spooled up and the lunar module punched down through a darkened sky toward a silver cratered plain. Computers ticked through guidance cycles, Mission Control in Houston monitored telemetry, and Aldrin called out velocity and altitude, while Armstrong scanned increasingly detailed lunar terrain through the window. Then the computer began throwing program alarms, discrete messages, 1201 and 1202, announcing executive overflow in the Apollo guidance computer. In Houston, guidance officer Steve Bales and engineer Jack Garman identified the alarms as non-fatal executive resets caused by extraneous rendezvous radar data left in a mode the guidance software did not expect. Flight director Gene Kranz and his tight team paused only long enough for Garman's diagnostic and Bales's terse go. Mission Control radioed back that they were GO on the alarm. Back in Eagle, the alarms hammered the cabin, each beep interrupting the descent cadence. Aldrin and Armstrong acknowledged them, held to checklist discipline, and watched the computer continue to steer. Then Armstrong saw something the instruments had not. The computer's planned touchdown spot lay in a field of boulders near a prominent feature later named West Crater. The automated landing point would have been on a slope strewn with rocks big enough to tip the vehicle. Armstrong made an instant, calm decision to take manual control. He switched the hand controller from automatic to pilot mode and flew Eagle like a delicate, brass-trimmed aircraft over a hostile sea of regolith. Aldrin's readouts grew sharper, fuel warnings more urgent. Houston tallied margins and watched the numbers fall. The descent stretched into taut, cinematic minutes as Armstrong shepherded the module to a safer, flatter plane, calling out attitude and rate while Aldrin monitored propellant and engine performance. Touchdown came after an excruciating interval of manual corrections and whispered confirmations. The lander's skids kissed Mare Tranquillitatis with only seconds of reserve propellant remaining. Relief was immediate but fragile, and the crew now faced the intimate work of egress and sample collection, the very purpose for which the mission had risked everything. Minutes after Eagle settled on Mare Tranquillitatis on July 20th, 1969, the cramped, brass-toned cabin became a laboratory of ritual. Neil A. Armstrong descended the ladder, each rung an intimate mechanical liturgy, and at 10:56 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, he placed his boot on lunar regolith and uttered the now iconic sentence, "That's one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind." The boot print he left was immediate and deliberate, a crisp impression in a fine, powdery surface he later compared to powdered charcoal. Edwin Buzz Aldrin joined him minutes later and called the terrain magnificent desolation, a terse appraisal that captured the planetless silence. The two men moved with the studied economy of trained artisans under severe constraints. Mission rules, life support consumables, and the lander's fragile propellant margins limited them to a tightly choreographed extravehicular activity of roughly 2 hours and 31 minutes. They planted the United States flag within view of a global audience watching live television, the fabric held out by a horizontal bar so it would appear unfurled in vacuum, and they fixed the commemorative plaque to the ladder bearing the inscription, "Here men from the planet Earth first set foot upon the moon, July 1969 AD. We came in peace for all mankind." Aldrin and Armstrong then shifted from ceremonial acts to precise scientific work. They deployed components of the Apollo Lunar Surface Experiments package, the passive seismic experiment to record moonquakes and meteoroid impacts, and the laser-ranging retroreflector to enable centimeter-scale distance measurements from Earth. Aldrin unrolled the solar wind composition foil, a delicate experiment designed to trap particles streaming from the sun. Each deployment required exact placement, bolt torquing, and precise instrument orientation. Every step was timed against a countdown in Houston and against dwindling oxygen and battery reserves. Systematic geology became the day's labor. Armstrong and Aldrin collected rock and regolith with a geological hammer, tongs, and a core tube, selecting samples that spanned textures and tones and bagging and tagging, each with procedural rigor so scientists on Earth could interpret context. In total, the mission returned about 21.55 kilograms of lunar material, carefully stowed in the Ascent cabin for return. Above them, Michael Collins circled alone in Columbia, the solitary sentinel in lunar orbit, executing guidance checks, photographing the surface, and keeping a vigil that linked the tiny human drama below to the mechanics of return. The EVA blended crystalline scientific purpose with indelible human tableau, a flag, footprints, a plaque, and two men working against the ticking clock of consumables, setting the stage for the climactic ascent that would decide whether those samples and that gilded courage would make it home. After their brass-toned ritual on Mare Tranquillitatis, Neil A. Armstrong and Edwin Buzz Aldrin sealed the hatch, stowed tools and 21.55 kilograms of lunar samples, and on July 21, 1969, the Eagle's ascent stage fired and lifted them from the powdery plain, leaving the descent stage as a silent iron relic. The climb back to lunar orbit was a cold mathematical ballet, rendezvous windows, radar locks, and Michael Collins alone in Columbia, handling station keeping and attitude trims, while telemetry flowed cleanly between the three men and mission control in Houston. Minutes stretched into taut intervals as Armstrong guided Eagle into a precise docking approach. The capture latches engaged, hatches cycled, and the three astronauts shared a brief, grave, jubilant embrace before transferring tongs, core samples, film magazines, and the sealed sample containers into Columbia. The ascent stage was jettisoned and became a quiet footnote as Columbia and its precious human freight readied for the long arc home. That same July 21st, the service module's main engine executed the trans-Earth injection burn, a decisive push that left lunar gravity behind and placed Columbia on a calculated corridor toward Earth. The coast was tense but clinically precise. Consumables checked, re-entry procedures rehearsed, and the fragile cargo of rock and data locked into sterile containers. On July 24, 1969, Columbia bluntly re-entered the atmosphere and splashed down in the North Pacific. The recovery ship USS Hornet and helicopter detachments plucked the astronauts from the ocean and moved them into the mobile quarantine facility to guard against any unknown contagion. Relief and worldwide jubilation arrived as reporters and presidents celebrated. Scientists immediately took custody of the lunar samples and telemetry, sealing, cataloging, and transporting them to the Lunar Receiving Laboratory in Houston, where the mission's empirical bounty would be analyzed, interpreted, and set to reshape science and policy alike. After the climactic docking and splashdown, the 21.55 kilograms of lunar rock and months of ALSEP telemetry shifted quickly from spectacle to scrutiny and helped rewrite planetary science. Laboratory radiometric dating placed Highland and orthosites at about 4.4 to 4.5 billion years, and Mare basalts between roughly 3.2 and 3.8 billion years, creating a clear, elegant timeline for early inner solar system volcanism and crust formation. Chemical and oxygen isotope fingerprints in those samples, paired with seismic data from the passive seismic experiment, painted a consistent picture of a differentiated moon. A thick anorthositic crust, a layered mantle, and a relatively small, partially molten core. Those findings strengthened the giant impact hypothesis for the moon's origin. The laser-ranging retroreflector returned centimeter-scale distance data that refined orbital dynamics, provided tests of general relativity, and measured lunar recession at about 3.8 centimeters per year. Politically and technologically, Apollo 11 was a Cold War turning point. It fulfilled President Kennedy's pledge, altered geopolitical standing, and catalyzed decades of investment in rocketry, computing, and remote sensing. Culturally, it became a gilded global icon that inspired generations to pursue STEM and shaped space policy priorities such as robotic exploration, sample return, and plans for eventual human return. In short, Apollo 11 turned human daring into durable knowledge, leaving both a mythos and a scientific ledger that still guide our plans to return to the moon and to reach beyond.